Support for this podcast comes from the law firm of Davis Malm. Whether you're a developer, property owner, manager, or commercial tenant, their real estate attorneys know the lay of the land, not just the law. Learn more at davismalm.com.
Hey, it's Daryl. Team Common is currently working on our transition to a weekly show. We'll be back this summer with new episodes. In the meantime, here's one from our archives.
WBUR Podcasts, Boston.
I'm Carrie Young, in for Daryl C. Murphy, and you're listening to The Common. Well, as of this month, the Massachusetts Department of Transportation has a few new appointees to its board of directors. Among them is Dr. Lisa Iezzoni, who is a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. She's also the first member of the disability community to serve on the board. And with that, she brings a wealth of advocacy and lived experience to accessibility issues around transportation systems. I'm really excited for this conversation. So first, I'm going to welcome Dr. Iezzoni.
Thank you for having me.
So, Dr. Iezzoni, you are the first member of the MassDOT board to be part of the disabled community. Number one, did you know that beforehand? And does that surprise you?
No, I didn't know that. And it was only from the Boston Globe coverage, quite frankly, that came out that I realized that I was the first person with a disability to serve in this capacity. And to be honest, I am a bit surprised. People with disabilities, we're out there in our wheelchairs. We're out there with our families and our friends and getting around. And I think, though, that we do have very specific access needs. And so I'm just so honored and pleased to have this possibility to make our voices heard.
Right. And if you could also tell us a little bit more about what MassDOT covers. Is this the MBTA activities? Is it roads? Is it sidewalks?
Well, MassDOT does oversee the MBTA, but this particular board is separate and distinct from the board that is engaged in MBTA activities specifically. So yesterday, for example, just to give you a sense, we heard a lot about the Sumner Tunnel. We also heard a lot about bridges being repaired and replaced. We heard about the capital investment program for the next 4 years of the Healey administration. We also heard some things about aeronautics, kind of new ideas about whether drones could deliver packages, for example. So basically, everything having to do with transportation and the infrastructure that supports that.
That Sumner Tunnel closure. I know I used to live in East Boston and relied on that tunnel. I can only imagine what kind of backups that's causing and the conversations you guys had.
Well, it was interesting because the MassDOT people have been very careful in planning for it. And although I'm a new board member, I'm impressed by how carefully they have thought about that, including with various healthcare facilities to make sure that there aren't delays in getting emergency needs met for some of the healthcare organizations that would ordinarily use the Sumner Tunnel for that purpose. But they also have been keeping very explicit data about this. And so you can actually look at the data that was presented at yesterday's board meeting to see where delays have occurred.
Yeah, you mentioned the work with healthcare facilities. Just the idea of trying to get an ambulance through gridlock traffic kind of makes me nervous. I understand you also work as a researcher. And with that, you've spent a lot of time focusing on the experiences of people with disabilities in the healthcare system. So I'm wondering if you see any overlap at all between your research and also this new role with MassDOT.
Absolutely, 100%. I last year did a look at worldwide experiences for cancer care for people with disabilities, and across the entire globe, transportation is an issue in people getting access to care. it's as simple as somebody on the ride not having the ride show up or show up late. For them, when they get to their doctor might not be able to see them because they're so late. So something as straightforward as that, to simply kind of planning for being able to get to appointments, being able to get the screening and preventive services that you need. So transportation is really key to accessing healthcare.
Well, here in Boston, I know you've used the transportation system here in Boston quite a bit, whether it's the MBTA or other modes, but knowing what you know about the city, how would you grade Boston in terms of transportation accessibility?
Well, this is a very, very, very old system. And so I think that we see that, and we see the effects of the age. And for me personally, when I need to get to a doctor's appointment, I put a lot of extra time knowing that the bus might be late, knowing that the subway might be late. I get these text alerts from the MBTA all the time warning me about that. So I think that it's just a matter of planning and realizing that it is going to take you extra time.
And I want you to dig into some of that a little bit more. Like, if you could talk about some of the specific challenges that you might have encountered as a transportation consumer, and if any of those experiences kind of have inspired you in this role to try to address that.
Well, there is a very clear problem. I am a wheelchair user. I've used a wheelchair since 1988, and I am very privileged as well. I am able to have different types of wheelchairs that I use for different purposes. For example, a scooter versus a power wheelchair. And there are certain stops that I am so terrified I will not take my power wheelchair to. And the reason for that is because the train comes in at a slightly different level than the platform. It's either above the platform or below the platform. And if it's even a few inches, I am just really worried about the safety for the casters, which are the small wheels on the front of my wheelchair. I know of a colleague of mine who once lost a caster of her power wheelchair in the gap between the platform and the subway car that she was trying to get onto. Fortunately, there were people there to rescue her at the time. She did lose her shoe.
Oh, man.
But she wasn't injured. But those kind of things really do cause a lot of consternation. And this is especially true for me at the Charles Street stop, which, ironically enough, is right in front of where I work, the Massachusetts General Hospital, where there are also a lot of patients and workers getting off. My understanding is that that is one of the most difficult stations, and I don't yet know what the time frame is for fixing that.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back.
Politics has never been stranger or more online, which is why the politics team at Wired is making a new show, Wired Politics Lab. It's all about how to navigate the endless stream of news and information and what to look out for. Each week on the show, we'll dig into far-right platforms, AI chatbots, influencer campaigns, and so much more. Wired Politics Lab launches Thursday, April 11th. Follow the show wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back. So are there other areas of transportation that interest you when it comes to improvements you're hoping to make?
One of the things that I am concerned about is the state's very laudable and excellent emphasis on bike lanes. I think it would be wonderful if we could get more people out there riding bicycles. There are so many advantages to doing that. But there are going to be places where that might potentially be dangerous to people with disabilities. The way that bike lanes are being positioned, sometimes they can be in the way of a bus ramp being put down for a wheelchair user to get onto the bus. And so I've begun to hear stories about people, for example, who are blind or people who are wheelchair users being a near miss with a bicycle or even sometimes hit by a bicycle rider. Now, again, I very much support more bike lanes, but I do think that we are going to have some discussions and conversations about how to improve safety for everybody in that setting.
And your last answer actually makes me think that when you talk about improvements that can be made to our transportation system to increase accessibility, it also just improves the whole system for anybody. But then that also makes me think about a statistic that I recently ran across that 1 in 4 Americans have some kind of disability at any one time. So can you reflect a little bit on that statistic and also just improvements in general?
Yes, thank you. That is true. From federal surveys suggests that about 26% of adult Americans have some type of disability, and disabilities are extremely diverse. The point that I also want to add, though, is that over the course of everybody's lifespan, most people will spend some time with a disability, even if it's something temporary, like a leg injury from a skiing accident, or it's developing arthritis or low vision or hearing loss in older age. So I think that improvements that are made to the transit system and the transit infrastructure for people with disabilities will ultimately affect almost everybody and improve their ability to get around.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Well, I want to talk a little bit about your first board meeting. That was on Wednesday, and I heard too that there was a capital investment plan for the next 5 years that was passed during that meeting. Was there anything particularly interesting that you can describe to us in layman's terms that was in that plan?
Well, one of the things that was really interesting to me is that when they think about evaluating their investments, they think about it in terms of communities of people who might really, really need those investments because they have less privilege than others do. For example, they rate their spending by minority communities, by low English proficient communities, and by low income communities in terms of whether they meet certain standards for expenditures. I think, again, people can go onto the website and see the capital investment plan if they want to see some details.
And so just to harken back to the beginning, when we talked about your role, you are the consumer representative on this board. Have you had a chance yet to talk a lot to different consumers since your appointment? And what have you heard from them, if so?
I have started speaking to consumers, and people have been very generous in talking to me about this. I have the privilege of serving on the Boston Center for Independent Living board and have done so since 2005. And in that capacity, we talk about transit a lot. But I think the potential clash between the very excellent focus on the bike lanes and safety for people with disabilities has been a real topic of conversation. One of the things also that I spoke about a few minutes ago was the problem getting from platforms onto subways because of differences in the positioning of the platform versus the subway when it comes in. There are bridge plates that can be put to cover either a gap or that difference in height, but there are not personnel staffing all the stations. And so that's why sometimes I will avoid certain stations because I just know that I would need a bridge plate there, but I can't reliably rely on there being the personnel there to put the bridge plate down. So that is an issue that I want to also bring up.
Well, Dr. Lisa Iezzoni, this was a really fascinating conversation to hear about what people are talking about inside this transportation board and what we might be able to expect coming up.
Well, thank you so much for having me. All of us need to get around. And so I'm really happy to have this opportunity to hopefully make it better for people with disabilities.
Thanks for listening. I'm Daryl C. Murphy. Talk to you later.